Hello, everyone. My name is Sandeep Rao, and I'm a product manager at the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants in Durham, North Carolina. The alternative workforce, or otherwise known as the gig economy, is expected to triple to 42 million workers in the United States. And also, 45% of employees worldwide say they are having trouble filling their open positions. In December 2020, the AICPA launched a new course called Developing Your Alternative Workforce, or otherwise known as Gig Strategy for the Global CPA Profession. We'll discuss why this has happened, what opportunities it offers for your practice or the company you work for. And wherever you are, any part of the globe, we would like to show what this means for our professional community and your business. That's all coming up in the episode, The Gig Economy. What is it? This podcast is brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. We are the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. Every week, we like to share insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that will help you stay ahead of the curve, no matter what business you're in. In this episode, The Gig Economy, what is it? We'll be talking about the alternative or the gig workforce with our expert guest, Samantha Griffiths. We'll answer questions like, what is the gig economy? What are the various types of gig workers that are out there? And most importantly, how to apply gig strategy. So without further ado, let's meet our guest. Hi, Samantha. Where are you joining us from?
Hi, Sandeep. Just wanted to say I'm delighted to be able to join you today, all the way from UK, Birmingham to be precise, located in the heart of England.
Thank you, Sam. We're happy to have you with us. What else are you working on, and how does that connect with the accounting and finance profession?
Well, at the moment, I'm just beginning a couple of listed company annual report projects and preparing to deliver some training sessions around board effectiveness for the new year. I'm also in the process of submitting research proposals with a leading UK university regarding entrepreneurial boards and cognitive diversity in the boardroom. All of this connects to the accounting and finance function because clearly finance is usually to be found at the heart of the boardroom. I'm particularly interested in the role of integrated thinking and how that translates into value creation. For many years, I've helped businesses communicate value to a range of stakeholders, and now I'm interested in how value translates into thinking and positive boardroom behaviours.
And may I ask the name of the company you work with?
Yeah, I work with a company called Sagenius. It's been around for about the last 15 years and, works with a range of different organisations. I guess there are generally two sides to a sort of typical workday for me. So, on the one hand, there's kind of the client engagement side, particularly in training sessions where days will centre around putting on a performance, gaining the trust of the audience, taking concepts, helping them to apply knowledge and insight into their own particular challenges and opportunities. The other type of typical day is the one that gets punctuated with conversations, research, reflection, possibilities. The two different types of typical day do share things in common. The days tend to be long, but always involve working with clients and colleagues that I like, respect, trust, and importantly, work that I like, in particular work that challenges me and allows me to challenge. I mean, don't get me wrong, we all have to do things that we would prefer were at the bottom of our to-do list or not on our to-do list at all. And that reminds me of another thing. I personally dislike to-do lists. I much prefer to make a list of all the things I've achieved in a day, or not, as the case may be. In terms of clients, they range from listed companies and large institutions and organisations, spanning all kinds of sectors, all the way through to small owner-managed businesses. However, I'm particularly interested in those organisations that are looking to push boundaries and to do things differently in order to make a positive difference. So, for instance, in the last 6 months, I've been involved in projects that have linked to conversations around digitalisation of society, the circular economy, international trade relationships. Hopefully that gives you some insight into what I do and how I go about doing what I do.
Thank you, Sam. Well, let's switch our focus now and discuss why you've joined us on this podcast called The Gig Economy. What is it? Why is this worth looking at? And what are some of the main disruptions or challenges regarding the gig economy?
Well, I think the gig economy or alternative workforce is huge. And despite common misconceptions, it's not actually that new. Estimates regarding the size of the gig economy will vary widely, and that depends very much on how freelance or independent contract work is categorised. A study done earlier this year focused on digital platforms, for instance, and it was predicting rapid growth of the global gig economy, believing that it will benefit from double-digit growth over the next 5 years, due in part to changes around things like the idea of the sharing economy, increasing digitalisation rates in developing countries, as well as a more cultural shift towards flexible work-life environments. I saw a study only a day or two ago done by MasterCard that predicts the global gross gig economy volumes of approximately 455 billion by 2023. And that figure, excludes small businesses and temp services that are absent of digital marketplaces and other non-digital platform-based independent contractors. Interestingly, it also excluded Russia and China from its global projections. Suffice it to say, I think the big economy is large and, has the potential to get even bigger. In addition, the catalyst is coming from both the supply and demand sides. So, for instance, the Human Capital Institute predicts that over the next couple of years, more than a third of the organisations that responded to a survey they did plan to increase their use of alternative workers. Also, as I began putting together some learning material for the AICPA CIMA products, it occurred to me that I'd been involved in the gig economy for the last 20 years. And over that time, I guess it has become easier and a more acceptable way to work. Some will describe it as a big experiment. For some, that will be, fear, perhaps favoured by others. Clearly, the gig economy addresses fundamental questions about whether it's killing the way we work and think about jobs, roles and responsibilities, or whether it's actually creating a world of new possibilities. The disruptors, well, they include things like changing values and attitudes regarding what work means to people, the role of communications and technology in matching organisations and gig workers, as well as the increasing technology supporting workflows and processes. Also importantly is the need for both organisations and increasingly individuals to operate in an ever-dynamic and fluid environment.
So tell us, Sam, what originally sparked your interest in this area?
Well, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Putting aside the comments that I'll make later regarding exploitation, I can remember being only about 10 and being shown how to answer the phone, act as a receptionist, greet the bank manager. First-hand experience of the importance of cash flow in terms of whether it was steak for dinner or beans on toast. This prepared me for a world of unpredictability, a willingness to take risks, and a fear of being trapped and being told I couldn't do something. However, having managed to navigate the early years, so I think I went to something like 9 different schools when I was growing up, I eventually managed to get myself into a top UK business school and then onto a graduate entry scheme for a large multinational organisation, training as an accountant. I guess I felt I had to try to at least start my career doing sensible things. Serendipity then got me to where I am now. So chance encounters, personal recommendations, exposure to organisations, personally developed networks of interesting people. I think this is one of the big differences that occurs to me now. I think it's probably much easier for people leaving school or college to actually be able to do their own thing and have a very different relationship with work, what they do and how they choose to do it.
Could you talk a little bit about the different types of gig workers? So I've heard the terms independent contractors, freelancers, zero-hour workers, something I think that's more common possibly in Europe than more so in the United States. Anything you could elaborate on how we can look at these different types of alternative or gig workers?
Yeah, I guess there are many, different labels, which is one of the issues that give that give way to the different types of alternative work arrangements. So if I just pick over some of the few that you just kind of mentioned. If you take something like independent contractors, these are people who are going to be typically taking on a single project over a long period of time and are perhaps more likely to be working alongside a single client for a fixed period of time. Things like their tax affairs, the trading status they choose, how much admin they have to take on, will depend very much on whether they work directly or whether they choose to work via an agency. Typically, independent contractors will be working on site or at the offices of a client. Whereas if we then think about perhaps freelancers, clearly there are some similarities but also some differences. So freelancers are going to be crucially responsible for their own admin, billing, charging, tax affairs, trading status, and they're going to be very much in control of where and when they choose to work. Engagements will typically be shorter term, smaller in scale, and they won't typically be employing their own staff. They will be different from an independent contractor in that they are typically working on multiple projects simultaneously and with a portfolio of clients, and again, typically will be working remotely. If you then just sort of think about 0-hour workers, which I think is one of the groups that you just mentioned, these are going to be typically full or part-time employees, but what distinguishes them from traditional mainstream payroll staff is that they will have absolutely no guarantee of the hours that they will be required to work. And that type of work might make it perhaps more difficult or challenging if they have to plan for things like childcare arrangements or their ability to actually take on additional jobs at the same time. However, one of the issues is trying to obviously pigeonhole arrangements that are fluid and potentially mean different things to different people. And that's going to present challenges and categorising, measuring, assessing this sector of the labour market that is obviously increasing in importance. And obviously, for all the characteristics of the different types of alternative worker I just mentioned, there will always be exceptions.
So I've heard that the gig workforce is quite diverse. Could you give some examples of this?
Yeah, the alternative workforce does indeed represent a diverse source of labour and talent, which can help organisations to diversify their labour resources. For instance, thinking about it from a generational perspective, some organisations could potentially have 5 different generations of workers coexisting in and beyond their workplaces. If we just take a few minutes to think about this, if you take, for instance, the category known as Generation Z, these guys typically represent a hyper-connected group, are increasingly turning their back on traditional work arrangements and entry-level jobs in order to be able to experience what alternative work arrangements are available. Typically, they're looking for variety and will have different expectations around what work has to offer them and perhaps a desire for things to happen more immediately or certainly quicker. If you then look at millennials, so this group typically make up the largest percentage of the workforce, but are increasingly experimenting and moving across to alternative work arrangements. And again, this may be down to the ability to get more experience in a shorter period of time, perhaps a resistance to put all their eggs in one basket by having multiple work arrangements. If you think about those who we might classify as Generation X, so typically those born between about 1965 and 76, this group are increasingly looking to make major changes in their work arrangements, perhaps ranging from part-time work to perhaps setting up a side business. And then you have the baby boomers. Interestingly, this group represents one of the fastest growing segments of the gig economy, and their attitudes to retirement are changing. For instance, in some cases, it may be that individuals may not be able to afford to retire at this point, or may be because, health outcomes continue to be better and they want to find ways to proactively remain physically and mentally fit. So as we can see, motivations may differ, but also the types of work and activities undertaken in the gig economy may vary widely. So whether that is low-skilled, low-value microtasks all the way through to a highly skilled, high-value activities such as being an interim CEO or CFO involved in a large-scale turnaround situation. Also, it's going to be important to distinguish between those who proactively choose to participate in the alternative workforce and those who have no choice, perhaps forced because they're finding it difficult to access full-time, permanent payroll work.
Let's look more at what companies and individuals can do going forward to help plan for this new economy and looking more specific about what's happening now. So what would you say are some practical steps to help the affected sectors, the companies, and members of our profession that can help turn all these changes in workforce into some opportunity?
Well, I think as a starting point, it's about taking time out to look at the gig workforce through a strategic lens. It's going to be important to plan on how a strategy is actually implemented and thinking about how it can be actioned rather than just simply winging it or adopting a transactional basis approach. The profession, clearly has a role to play in helping to shape policy. And this is going to involve things like encouraging conversations with its members to challenge and empower organisations and individuals about the nature of work and how individuals and teams contribute to what gets done, why it gets done, when and how it gets done. The profession has a role to play, I think, in assessing to what extent the regulatory and organisational frameworks and structures that exist, whether these actually continue to be fit for purpose. I think the profession also has a responsibility to ensure its future talent is prepared. So this includes soft skills as well as the usual technical and professional skills. And the finance professionals of tomorrow are able to navigate alternative work arrangements, whether that is as users or as producers within the gig economy.
Yes, I do agree. It's important that everyone look at this, as you said, strategically and not just on a one-time basis. This is something that's probably not going to go away anytime soon. It's just going to keep changing. So let's look at technology and digitization, which we talked a little bit about earlier. How is this changing the gig workforce? So what are some challenges that not only the workers, but the companies would have to deal with new challenges such as blockchain, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, etc.?
Technology is clearly changing how people work and what they do. We're all moving away from the idea of routine hours, fixed locations, and traditional employment contracts are certainly being displaced by people wanting to contract in different ways. And that is, enabled and assisted to a large extent by technology. So as you've said, for example, blockchain is an emerging technology that may assist in the sourcing and traceability of work done by both traditional employees and the alternative workforce. As already discussed, technology gives rise to additional risks and considerations such as cybersecurity. Also issues around things like the monitoring and surveillance of workers' activities, which is something that has been increasingly discussed, particularly during the pandemic. Even basic considerations, such as if there are gig workers who use their own devices, so things like laptops, mobiles, tablets, you need to think about whether your company's cyber protocols are actually aligned to what's actually happening in practice.
Yes, and I know there's other areas out there, such as artificial intelligence, such as could a chatbot possibly replace certain functions, which may take away, but could also open up new opportunities for gig workers, and the emergence of robotics, process automation. So let's now maybe move into the area of cost and finance. Most of our members are CPAs, and they're looking to help their clients, and many of the industry accountants are always looking for ways to save costs, particularly in the challenging times that we're in now. So when I look at the gig workers, sometimes that might mean cost savings because, you don't have to pay them employee benefit or there's no insurance requirements. So if somebody were to say, does employing gig workers generally mean more cost savings? Is that an accurate statement?
Well, I think it's true to say that, gig workers generally don't have access to paid employee benefits, such as you've already mentioned, health insurance or life insurance. So in that sense, it may represent a source of cost saving. Also, though, there are many misconceptions around things like gig workers' rates that can sometimes be a bone of contention, particularly with full-time employees who will sometimes incorrectly focus on day rates paid to some contractors, without considering the fact that when this group of workers don't work, they don't get paid. When they're sick, they don't get paid. In addition, many gig workers are going to be hired through employment agencies, which will apply a markup to the rates at which the agency sources workers. Also, the gig rates are going to be based on, supply and demand in the marketplace, which will potentially be heavily dependent on negotiation. Again, that will depend to what extent the skills and expertise offered by the gig worker are in demand. I think it's also important to consider the benefits and not simply focus on the cost side of the equation. So are gig workers providing the organisation with valuable skills that simply don't currently exist? And gig workers will require training, which will take up some time and resource. And I think this just simply reflects and reinforces the importance of planning and budgeting for the gig workforce as part of the overall strategy.
So Sam, I've heard the term impoverished alternative. How does that relate to the gig mindset in relation to traditional workforce arrangements?
Well, personally speaking, no, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's just simply an impoverished alternative. And again, I think that goes back to some of those ideas I kind of sort of alluded to earlier, which was around perhaps in the past a stigma being attached to people choosing alternative work arrangements because there was no proper work available for them to do. I think organisations, individuals and teams, alternative work arrangements can provide a richness in terms of both the quality of work and the hidden power of the relationships and the experiences that are potentially beneficial for all. But clearly that will depend to some extent on the type of work or activity that's undertaken. There are some people who argue that as a gig worker, you never really get to be part of the team. However, I think it's incumbent upon, the gig worker or those who are involved in alternative work arrangements to actually be proactive, and it's down to the gigger to create and leverage their own personal teams and support networks.
Let's try to get ahead of the curve if we can and look at some of the future challenges. Is there any one big change that lies ahead that you'd like to call out, and anything that would help our accounting and finance members better prepare for future changes?
I think the structure or the lack of what work looks like is probably going to be one of the biggest changes that lies ahead. Finance professionals, can prepare by being more willing to be the architects and designers of their own career choices. I think they can also find ways to ensure sufficient resources are prioritised and allocated, because clearly that's a role that they very often perform within organisations, and perhaps find ways to bridge the gap between traditional and alternative work arrangements. I think it's important to recognise that the two worlds are not mutually exclusive, and that the challenge will be in finding solutions that are more inclusive.
Many of our members are practicing CPAs, or such as in the UK, it could be chartered accountants, or they have an equivalent credential in another country. We have accounting firms, people are serving clients. Is there any way that the changes in the gig economy and the new way the companies should be looking at the gig workforce, such as in a strategic way, would help, say, a niche practice in an accounting firm?
Yeah, well, I think we can kind of look at this from both sides of the fence. First of all, obviously from a practical point, during very busy periods or perhaps in the development of new services, firms and CPAs or chartered accountants working for firms can think about how the alternative workforce and gig economy can be leveraged to supplement the existing resources, as well as perhaps coming up with new ideas and opening up new networks. From a business development perspective, there are also lots of opportunities to provide services for those working within the gig economy. So ranging from perhaps providing services to gig workers around basic record keeping, 1099 reporting, tax planning, budgeting, as well as perhaps acting as a gatekeeper to a much wider support network for these perhaps existing as well as potential or new clients.
That's a very good point. Certainly as gig workers, many now are working remotely, some may be working in other states or countries. There's so many tax issues just to keep track of. 1099 reporting, as you mentioned, possibly 1042 reporting if you're working in a foreign country. And as we know, the laws change across states, within territories, such as, for example, one can't assume that doing business in Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory, is the same as doing business in one of the 50 states. And then, of course, if you add Europe and other countries, it's just an ever-changing field that CPAs, chartered accountants, could definitely provide help to gig workers who may not have the finance acumen. So before we wrap up, let's do some signposting. For anyone who'd like to find out more about this topic and about your work in particular, are there any resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, there is the webcast and the self-study online course that I've been working on for the last few months regarding the gig economy, and that will help you to qualify for CPD and CPE credit. There are also a huge amount of reports that are available online. So, for instance, EY had a very, insightful report around how the gig economy is changing the workforce. So I'd really kind of encourage people to, take time to have a look around the internet, see what's available, talk to their colleagues about it, because you may well find that actually you're not the only one thinking about this, and that this is something that is of interest to your friends and colleagues.
Thank you, Sam. Is there just one message you'd like to leave for our accounting and finance professionals that would help them better understand the gig economy and help plan for it?
Keep an open mind. Trust in your values. Clearly, those are always incredibly important. But think about how you can use your skill set to make sense of the anticipated and not so anticipated changes that are increasingly a way of life, both professionally and personally. So I think it's up to members to build resilience, maintain the momentum, and I would actively encourage them to try to find some ways to unleash their inner gig spirit.
Thank you once again, Samantha.
Thanks.
There's plenty more ways to explore about the gig economy. So for any learner or anyone out there who wants to find out more, we have some interesting links right here in the show notes of this episode. To see the links, just click on the episode's info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your computer web browser. You'll find everything right there. There are other websites we'd recommend for listeners interested in taking this further. Please jump straight into our brand new portal at future.aicpa.org. That's future.aicpa.org. There you'll find many courses, webinars, and other professional development resources, some of it which is available at no additional cost, that will help you stay ahead of the curve. And as our speaker had mentioned earlier, we do have some new courses coming out specifically on the gig economy, both in webcast and self-study online format. From our Durham, North Carolina office, this is Sandeep Rao. We will be back soon with more conversations that will help you and your profession go beyond disruptions. Till next time, keep listening, keep learning, and please be safe during these difficult times. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.